To the Point with Michael Williams.
Good morning. Mar-a-Lago on Palm Beach is once again abuzz with planning for a second term in the White House for President-elect Donald Trump. My guest today, Joe Budd, Florida GOP State Committee man, businessman, former congressional candidate, and Melissa McKinlay, Democrat, former Palm Beach County Commissioner, and former president of the Florida Association of Counties. You were with us election night. Appreciate you being with us on this Sunday after. Mr. Trump won in 2016 by about 1.5 points, then 3 points in Florida 2020, then 14 to 15 point wipeout in 2024. Yes, Republicans have a voter advantage of registration of about 1 million people, but across demographics, both Florida and nationally, did very, very well. The Hispanic vote, which Democrats once, perhaps to their mistake, assumed would increasingly be theirs, turned very sharply for him. Your thoughts as you look at post-election strategy, and as Democrats pick over a very tough night, at least statewide and nationally. We'll talk a little more locally later.
You know, I think the Republican advantage in Florida has been building for quite some time. You know, when I first ran for office, I think we had the Democrats had about a 800,000 voter advantage, and now we're at 1 million deficit. And what the Republicans, I think, have done really well is they stayed consistent on their message. You know, they went down into Miami, they targeted that Hispanic vote. They stuck on the, you know, you don't want socialism creeping into America. That's what you left in the countries that you fled to come here for a better life. And I also think the immigration message resonated with a lot of the Hispanic vote down in Miami. You know, they came here, they followed the process, and they want, you know, to keep the borders open to people who are legally following the process. And the Republicans beat us at those messages.
And Joe Budd, your thoughts, and of course economy, immigration, many thought ultimately drove this. Do you think pocketbook issues were a big part of what Ms. McKinlay talked about as well?
Well, I think the most effective ad that played this year, most people look at it as that transgender surgeries in prison that Kamala said she would allow anyone to do, and they looked at that as, maybe some people looked at it as an LGBTQ issue. That was an economic issue. You saw that as an economic issue. People were saying blue-class workers who, maybe many of them, struggle week to week just to put food on the table.
What's that got to do with
transgender? Well, but they saw that as, you're going to spend money for that purpose when we're having these struggles of putting food on our table with the inflation issues. So I think from a financial economic perspective, it was offensive. And I think that was probably the most effective ad this political season.
Ms. McKinlay, your response?
I didn't see the ad.
But what I hear you saying is because people are saying concentrate on things that we're concerned
that's
about,
right.
The economy,
yes.
And that largely that's not an issue. We're worried about our pocketbook, we're worried about immigration. Am I reading you correctly
Absolutely
there?
Correct.
Moving forward in Florida, how did Democrats come out of the wilderness? Statewide office, the Republicans have had a lock statewide for so many years and still do, and hope that it will only grow now. What are Democrats saying to one another right now when it comes to statewide office here, and how they try to move beyond that?
You know, a lot of jokes in the Democratic circle of what state should we move to, what country should we move to. I think, you know, the Democratic Party this year, in my opinion, made a mistake of trying to put somebody in every single race across the state of Florida. What you do when you do that is you allow the Republican candidate in some races who's obviously going to win because the numbers will never be in the Democrats' favor, and you allow them to continue to fundraise, to continue to be out there on the ground, stumping and raising money and campaigning down into the general. I think the Democratic Party and its leadership has really got to focus on those few races that they can actually make a difference. And a lot of that's going to come down to your school board races. You saw the partisan school board thing fail. I think a lot of that's going to come down to your city commission races. Folks are already filing to run for the March elections that started this week, and your county races.
Trump 2.0 with the Florida shade to your response. What are you expecting, sir?
Well, one of the things that I saw on election night that I was pleasantly surprised about was the difference in 2020 to 2024 right here in Palm Beach County, where President Trump lost the county by about 100,000 votes. This go around, that was only a little over 5,000 votes. And you have to give kudos to the county party here. Talk about fundraising for Democrats throughout the state of Florida. We set records in Palm Beach County this year under Chairman Kevin Neal, the biggest fundraising event that any party had in any county throughout the state. And the best decision there was to raise the prices because we sell out every year. and there was some infighting over the price of that event, but we raised a lot of money, records.
You at one point organized, created Club 45, supporting then first-term President Trump. You were a DeSantis supporter at the start of the year.
Right.
What did the start of the year said, I like DeSantis more than Trump, and what is kind of, now that you've got former President Trump now about to have a second term, your thoughts on that switch?
Well, it's not even what I was earlier in the year. I was an early supporter of both DeSantis for governor and Trump for president, and
but you supported Mr. DeSantis.
I did,
and
Mr. DeSantis, Governor DeSantis, is a policy wonk, okay, and he's done very well at that, and I like the way that he interacts with people from the podium, let's say, but I have to say, if there's a decision to be made right now in 2028, I'm a J.D. Vance guy all the way. There's no doubt about it. I think the VP debate that he had was absolutely outstanding. It was a great pick by President Trump to solidify that decorum that some people say lacks in the presidential office. J.D. Vance owns that, and he's done a great job.
I don't even want to think about 2028. I think I just want to get through Thanksgiving and Christmas. I do think one thing, I was looking at the results in the recount of the House District 93 race between Catherine Waldron and Ann Gerwig. And one thing that jumped out at me was the high number of undervotes. And so I would be interested in seeing all of the numbers and how many people actually skipped voting in certain races, and see how much of a difference that made.
I have to ask you as a Republican too, sir, there's been no soul searching from Republicans. The day after the election, say whatever else you will about her, she graciously conceded and said we'll have a peaceful transfer of power. Nobody doubts that had Mr. Trump lost this election, he would not have done the same thing the next day. He denied the outcome of 2020 right up until Election Day. The day before the election, this time, he was saying there's cheating all over Pennsylvania. Suddenly went silent as soon as the numbers went his way. J.D. Vance would not commit that the election of 2020 had been fairly held. There's a lot of concerns about what that says people are willing to give away in order to have the person they want in office. Why is there no soul searching from Republicans on that?
Well, we won. So
right, no, but this is a very issue about your vote just can't count when you win. So why don't we hear Republicans acknowledging with some grace and humility, that's a big issue?
Well, I think it is a big issue. And I caught a lot of flack back in 2022 when I was running. I was asked this question, and I said Joe Biden was the democratically elected president.
You sat with me on this broadcast.
And I caught a lot of flack for that. And some people will look, where'd those 20 million votes go that aren't there this year that were there 2 years ago or 4 years ago? And you have to say the time was different. It was COVID. All these vote by mail ballots were going out there all over the place. And as I said then, as I say today, the rules are different in different states. Florida, I wish everybody would adopt Florida election laws, okay? I think we have the best in the country. And again, that's to the credit of Governor DeSantis. They've made multiple changes over the last 6 years to those rules. So I've been one who's acknowledged you lost. Step aside. This is a democracy. Preserve the country and what's best for the country.
Thoughts?
You saw the governor of Georgia,
Kemp,
and you saw Governor DeSantis back in 2020, be asked to investigate the election results, and both of them said no. So I do think that you had some Republican leadership around the country that supported the results.
I know there's so much, and it's so hard to wrap our arms around it, both Florida and the national perspective, but from a Florida perspective, including locally, final thoughts that you want to leave our viewers with on this few days after the election as we move forward?
I think all eyes are going to be what happens, and you and I talked about this, about what happens to Marco Rubio. If he should be appointed Secretary of State, which I think he would do a tremendous job in that role, what happens to his Senate seat? Does that shift what happens in the gubernatorial races in 2 years? And then as a Democrat, there's no one to blame. So when you come to the gubernatorial elections in 2 years, it was easy 2 years ago to blame Washington for all of the ills of the world. You're going to have all Republican control in the state of Florida. You're going to have all Republican control, it looks like, in Washington. How do those races get won, and where can the Democrats find a little niche stick themselves into.
Democrats did flip the Palm Beach County
They did.
Commission, so it wasn't a night that was all bad
They
for
did.
Democrats. We'll talk about that in successive broadcasts. Frame your final thoughts for the audience today.
Well, just even to follow up with the question you had just asked me, it was the Democrats that kept saying the end of democracy with President Trump. And that's just not the case. It's not the reality. They always accuse us of things that they do. Donald Trump was the duly elected Republican nominee for president. Kamala Harris was the selected candidate for president in the Democrat Party, which ultimately turned out to be a very risky choice. We're talking about somebody in 2020 who raised nearly $50 million for a presidential primary, ended up dropping out of the race, accumulated not even 1,000 votes. She never gained traction, and I think that that was the biggest mistake they made. And democracy, the Democrats said, we told them to stay home. We're not voting in a vice presidential primary, and then you want them to come out and vote for her as president.
Unprecedented situation. When in our modern time has the Democratic nominee for president ever stepped aside right before the election?
Final quick word positively as you're looking forward for Republicans in policy.
Well, I think, assuming we're going to control the House, and it looks that way,
As we sit here.
it looks like we'll get 220, the same number we have today. And I think that that's a mandate, and the Republicans better, the leadership better do all the things that they've promised to do. They're going to own all three houses as soon, including the legislative branch or the judicial branch of the government. So they should be able to do everything they want to do.
And it will be graded thusly, just as Democrats are as well. As you said, 2 years goes quickly till midterm. So each time that happens, they're graded thusly. Listen, I know we're just beginning to kind of carve through all this and can only scratch the surface, but we appreciate that. You two have been familiar faces for many years on this broadcast. We always appreciate your perspectives. And Brian Crowley, talk about familiar faces, up next.